Today, I want to go over a DIY alignment, which was done in 2020 before I started making YouTube videos. I figured this may interest some people, especially those on aftermarket coilovers, since common adjustments to ride height can throw the alignment outside the range of OEM specs. It becomes a custom alignment, and some big chain tire shops won't even touch your car. It likely won't qualify for free lifetime alignment services, which is understandable. Speaking of lifetime alignment, I will mention right away that for daily driven cars on stock suspension, there is very little benefit, if any, to a DIY alignment. If you are looking to maximize the life of your brand new tires for tens of thousands of miles, it's really hard to beat a dedicated shop alignment lift and computers. You'll see why shortly. My car is not daily driven aside from autocross, so tire life does not matter since I average 10 miles a year. This DIY is based on the string alignment common in motorsports and is accurate enough for many racing teams. For sake of time, this video already assumes you have some experience wrenching on cars and knowledge of basic alignment terms such as caster, camber, and toe. The car shown here is my Evo 9, but many of the concepts should still apply to many cars out there. Unless your house is a shop, there are three big challenges you will face. The first is finding level ground, since many garages are sloped for drainage. The second is getting the car high enough where you can still get underneath to make adjustments, all while keeping the suspension fully loaded. The last is getting the adjustment fasteners loosened, and let's start with that one. Because if your car is rusty in any way, I would start by checking if you can even remove the necessary jam and locking nuts. If they are seized, you want to soak these fasteners in penetrating fluid several days ahead, and have a torch ready. My front tie rod end was so corroded and hard to turn, several shops had trouble getting exactly zero toe. Sometimes you have to quit while ahead. Unless you have the proper tools to deal with snap bolts and bad day scenarios, you risk being left with an undrivable car. In the meantime, you can start building the wood crib stands, which solves the problem of getting the car high enough off the ground. You definitely do not need to build it up as high as I did, which was about 8 stacked layers of 2x4s. If your ground is concrete, make sure the bottom pieces are pressure treated so they don't rot out. For the rear stands, I added triangular wedges to act as a mini chock to keep the car from rolling off. The last remaining problem is the garage floor not being level, so you will need to find a way to shim the stands higher or lower to get them all level with each other and to the floor. Next step is preparing the car. I like to have everything close to how the alignment should be during an autocross run. For coilovers, this means setting the desired spring preload and height. Like the stock struts, the eccentric cam bolt can be oriented to your liking. On this car, there is an arrow which gives you more negative camber, -2 when facing the outside of the car, and around -1 when facing the inside. If your sway bars are preloaded, some people disconnect those, but I opted not to since the end link nuts are completely seized. I set my cold tire pressures and add or remove gas since many people don't run on full tanks. I put the equivalent amount of my body weight in the driver's seat and found a way to keep the steering wheel locked in the center position. If you need to measure or adjust caster, you will need to find a way to keep the brake pedal depressed. You will also need slip plates underneath the front tires. I am cheap and just used grocery bags, but you can also get creative and use other things. This makes it easier to turn the front wheels without the tires binding and shifting the wooden stand below. I can get my other preliminary measurements with the car on or off the ground since my camber gauge has a compensating 0 for unlevel surfaces. Toe measurement can be gathered by using 2 plates, 2 tape measures, and finding the difference. It's very easy to use, but note that they only measure toe for one axle at a time. Here are my initial measurements. Camber was -2.4 front left, -3.9 front right, 0 rear left, and -2.8 rear right. 3.5/8 inch toe out on the front axle and 1/2 inch toe out in the rear. If you're wondering why these numbers are all jacked up, it's because I recently had many suspension components removed from the car while I was replacing the bushings along with installing the front RCK and rear bump steer kits. Of course, I forgot to mark the cam bolts beforehand, so lesson learned there. Factory tire width is 235, and I am currently running 265s on a 9.5-inch wide wheel, so I run more negative camber up front compared to most cars. Prior to coilovers, I tried using camber caster plates with the factory MR Bilsteins. This allows you to adjust caster by moving the top mounting point front or back. On my setup, it just worsened the tire rub issues, so I scrapped it in favor for the Öhlins. If you can adjust caster on your car, this is where your DIY alignment starts. Since caster on my car is non-adjustable, I will continue on with camber in the back. By adjusting the cam bolt, it slides the lower control arm in and out, and I can get the camber in the ballpark range, which for me is negative 1.5. It is pointless to get it exact at this point, and I will explain this later when we adjust tow. After each adjustment, you will have to bounce the car up and down or slightly roll it back and forth to allow the adjustments to take and settle. Next, I set the camber on the front by adjusting the top hat hex screws. Since the eccentric bolt on the bottom was set to the maximum position, I do not have to adjust as much on top to get my target of -3. Some people will do the opposite and dial in more camber at the top plate and flip the bolt on the bottom to improve clearances between the tire and coilover. When you run wide tires, it really is trial and error. Final adjustment is tow, and is the most complicated because we need to build a perfectly square string box spaced out around the car. From the factory, this car has the same front and rear track width of 59.6 millimeters. If you are lucky and have a car like this, I have seen people simply tie a string around the rear tire and line it right up against the front tire and make the tow adjustments from there. However, my front to rear track width is different because I went with wider offset front wheels to improve turn-in and reduce understeer. I bought a solid metal rod from Home Depot, which seems to be used for grounding, but I can't quite remember. Anything long and straight will do. We need to notch 2 grooves the same distance on both bars for the string to rest. The number doesn't really matter. I use 76.25 inches, which I know is random, but as long as the measurement on both bars are equal, it's fine. I used fishing line with weights on the ends to keep it nice and tight. Using jack stands, I first made sure the bars were equal distance from each other, front to back. At the same time, you want to keep the height of the string near the center of each wheel. Since the floor is unlevel, you will need to adjust the height of each jack stand to compensate. Since we made equal grooves on the bars, the left to right distance between the 2 strings should be the same and parallel to the car. The next step is a pain, but the strings need to be moved and adjusted to an equal distance from the center of both wheels on each axle. You will have to keep moving the string around until it is perfectly square on all 4 sides, which requires a lot of measuring and remeasuring. You have to find ways to keep the tape measure tight or the measurement will be off. A second person really helps here. On staggered setups, the distance between the string and wheel center will be different between the front and back wheels. Since everything is now square, the toe measurement of each wheel can be obtained by finding the difference in length between the front and rear of the wheel and the string. Since I want 0 toe, both these measurements should be the same when done. Again, the exact number doesn't matter, they just have to be equal. Starting from the rear, I start making corrections to the toe via the adjacent cam bolts, which also slide the toe arm in and out. Like many cars, the suspension design here causes both camber and toe adjustments to affect each other. This means you have to check camber and toe back and forth until you are satisfied. This already takes time at a shop, and it takes a lot of time at home as well. I made a chart of my own personal observations, but I don't know how accurate it is. Your mileage may vary. Once it looks good, torque the nuts down or else all your hard work goes down the drain. Adjusting toe in the front does not mess with the camber as much as it does in the rear, so that's easier. You simply turn the tie rod an equal amount on both sides and keep measuring the distance between the wheel edges and string. Once you are done, recheck the total toe on each axle as a sanity check and drive the car around outside. Unfortunately, I am not sure if this type of alignment addresses crabbing or thrust angles, so unless you are the first owner of your car, any previous accident may affect your outcome. In my case, it drives straight without any drifting. Here are my final measurements. I don't drive my car much, and after 2 years, everything feels the same. It has been a while, so recently, while checking clearances on my brake line job, I got a chance to use my wood stands again and decided to do a pulse check on my alignment. These tape markings on the ground are the same ones from 2 years ago. I tried to replicate my previous setup as best as I could, and here are the results. Someday I hope to get this car onto an alignment lift and see how far off my numbers are from the shop. If you learned something useful in this video today, please like and subscribe, and I will see you all next time.